We are recording. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our September session entitled Steel and Stories, Women and Girls in the Criminal Legal System. Thank you for joining us today to speak about this important issue. I'm going to jump right in. Our agenda today, we're going to give you a brief overview of who we are at the Office of the Public Defender, highlight why it's important that we talk about women and girls and that the conversations should not simply be a footnote. Girlhood erased, discuss as to what that actually means in terms of the interaction of young children and how that impacts them and the impact in terms of their encounters in the criminal legal system. We're going to also speak about from a woman's perspective in the criminal legal system and what we hope will be the next steps. So the Office of the Public Defender, our mission, vision, and core values are centered on 5 pillars: client-centered, diversity and inclusion, tenacious advocacy, united in our mission, and culture of excellence. Client-centered means that we respect and advocate on behalf of the individuals. Diversity and inclusion, that we embrace differences and that we are open to individual ways of thinking. Tenacious advocacy, we advocate for our clients at every opportunity. Culture of excellence, that we are hardworking, dedicated, and committed. And united in our mission, our teams are working together towards a shared goal. And that shared goal is deeply rooted in justice, fairness, and dignity for all. We are 1,100 employees strong, and we have offices throughout the state of Maryland. In fact, we have 52 offices that are organized by the 12 geographical districts of the Maryland courts, Maryland district courts. In addition to our trial teams, we have specialty divisions that support our trial teams in various ways. Here is an example of the many specialty divisions that we have. In particular, in this conversation, you'll hear a little bit about the decarceration initiative, forensic mental health, and our social work teams, especially when we're talking about issues surrounding women and girls. Now, this conversation is particularly important because we need to center women and girls, especially when we're talking about the criminal legal system and talking about our juvenile justice system, because the experience of women and girls, as well as their needs and their pathways, differ significantly from that of their male counterparts. But we see in Maryland and across the country that very often the conversation does not even include women and girls. So we're going to take this opportunity through our conversation today to really center on the issues and bring attention to the experiences and the needs of women and girls in the criminal legal system. So let's start off with some important facts. And that is centered around adverse childhood experience, as commonly known as ACEs. ACEs speaks to potentially damaging experiences such as abuse or household dysfunction, and it brings forward the information as to how these experiences are linked to several negative health and behavioral outcomes, especially when we talk about adolescence. We know that nearly 2/3 of adults report exposure to at least one ACE, and 1/4 report exposure to 3 or more ACE adverse childhood experiences during their lifetime. And again, the examples include abuse or neglect in the home, dysfunction within the home. These have an effect, especially when you think about child, in particular, our conversation centered around girls during the developmental ages. And the studies have also found, and I highlight, that girls tend to experience more adverse childhood experiences than boys do. We also know through a 2020 study in which it was found that 20% of female youth reported 6 or more ACEs, and that is more than twice the proportion of male counterparts. The research that exists really supports the differences in experiences. For example, one such adverse experience is sexual abuse, or another example includes physical abuse. They find that young girls are exposed to those type of trauma more often than boys are. The girls also report different types compared to boys. And again, we emphasize the sexual abuse is most common among adolescent girls in particular, whereas their counterparts, the young boys, are reporting a higher number of physical abuse incidents. In 2017, Girlhood Interrupted did a study. It is a study by Georgetown Law, and it provides data that reveals for the first time that Black girls are perceived as less innocent and more adult-like than white girls of the same age. And this is in particular when we talk about the age group from 5 to 14. This impacts greatly the criminal legal system when you think about the interaction with police. You think about in the phases of charging, as well as when the individual comes to court. These carry through the different processes in the criminal legal system. But most importantly, we need to pay attention that our young Black girls are perceived older, and that impacts in terms of how they are treated at that initial interaction and upon arrest. And being mindful that we are not causing additional trauma during those touch points with the criminal legal system. We also know that in the experiences in schools, that Black girls are suspended 6 times more frequently than their white counterparts. And this is a disparity that is even worse when you compare girls to boys. Black girls represent 43% of the girls referred to law enforcement, and 8% of those arrested at schools, even though they constitute only 16% of the female student population. So Black girls are being referred to law enforcement and arrested at a disproportionate rate than their white counterparts. This chart really breaks it down even more so when you look at the punishment level, especially when we're looking at lower offenses, low-level offenses like attendance issues or what is perceived as disrespectful behavior. Again, when we look about system involvement, we see that anywhere from 31 to 81% of justice-involved girls have been subjected to some type of sexual abuse or violence. Their rate of sexual abuse is 4 times greater than their male justice-involved peers. So therefore, you see a higher rate of complex trauma. And in this population, you also see a high number of trauma and issues that are left unaddressed. There is a link between girls' trauma responses and their criminalization. Girls are often arrested for substance abuse. We see girls arrested for truancy, running away, and engaging in prostitution. But when you consider the trauma that they've experienced, these behaviors can be seen as coping or survival strategies. But unfortunately, these behaviors are often criminalized as opposed to looking into the root of why the girl or child was acting in a particular way, and therefore they are imprisoned for their behavior and further traumatized. Again, when we're talking about system involvement, we have statistics from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And according to OJJDP, almost 30% of children arrested in the United States are girls or young women. This figure is consistently increased over the last 20 years. The studies further indicate that there's anywhere from 31 to 81% of justice involved girls, again, have been subject to some sort of sexual abuse or violence. We also know that 40% of girls in the juvenile justice system identify as either gender nonconforming, transgender, bisexual, or lesbian. So that also speaks to their trauma and exposure, especially when we're talking about being subject to sexual abuse. Again, the statistics bear, and we see that the disparity continues through to the Department of Juvenile Services, with Black girls comprising 71% of those detained in 2024, but only an estimated 21% of the population. And again, I emphasize that 74% of those detained in 2024 were Black girls, whereas they only make up 21% of the population. We're seeing that girls tend to be more likely to be incarcerated based upon what is perceived a need to quote unquote protect them. Judges have stated that protecting the girls from, for example, getting pregnant or their housing instability, a decision is being made to detain them. And these decisions result in the girls essentially becoming re-traumatized within these detention centers instead of being connected to resources within the community that can adequately address their particular needs. So in fiscal year 24, the reality is that only Cheltenham Youth Detention Center, the Lower Eastern Shore Children's Center, and Western Maryland's Children's Center served girls. And one of the reasons that it was purported to be so, and that we see, is staffing shortages. And staffing shortages have disparately impacted girls. This means that there are limited locations that are available to girls throughout Maryland, meaning that girls will be more likely placed at a distance further away from their home. Again, if you place further away from your home, what inevitably happens is that your family does not have the ability to
Hey, sorry, there's a meeting I have to be on. Thank you, dear.
So these limited locations are available to because of the limited locations, this means that they're separated from their families and loved ones, and that further exacerbates any trauma, any impact of trauma, because they don't have that ability to connect with family, to have visits, which is often a critical part of their rehabilitation and care. So we also know that in terms of offenses, we also know that women are disproportionately charged with murder on the basis of the felony murder doctrine. Because felony murder laws impose identical sentences on individuals regardless of their participation in the crime, this can produce especially unjust punishments for women whose criminalized acts are very often coerced by their intimate partner. So what does this mean? What we see is that women are convicted for felony murder and are serving sentences, excessive sentences, for murders that they did not commit. And essentially, we have a horrific situation. One would argue as guilt by association. They did not commit the murder. They're in situations where they were coerced by an intimate partner. Unfortunately, a death results as a result of the felony. And although they did not commit the murder, they face the same, if not worse, excessive sentences. What else do we know? As of 2022, women in state prisons are more likely than men to be incarcerated for drug or property offenses. We also know that 25% of women in prison have been convicted of a drug offense compared to 12% of men in prison. We also know that 19% of incarcerated women have been convicted of a property crime compared to 13% among incarcerated men. What does that tell us? It essentially tells us that the solutions in terms of this particular population rest in the providing of services and community interventions so that women do not enter the system. We also know that as of 2021, over 60%, in fact, 62% of imprisoned women in state prisons had a child under the age of 18. We find that women are either the sole provider or if not the primary caregiver of their children. So when women are in prison, it has a dramatic impact on the family, and in consequence has a dramatic impact on the community. The fact that we also know is that the number of women in women's prisons has increased more than threefold. So from the number of 244 in 1978 to 833 was the count in 2017. And sadly, this number continues to rise. What else do we know? Unfortunately, relatively few women are eligible for sentence reductions. So, for example, under the Juvenile Restoration Act and under the Second Look Act, of almost the 200 people that were eligible to file motions under JUVRA, only 2 were women. Of the 500 plus people who are eligible for motions, possibly under the Second Look Act, only 7 are identified as women. A couple of theories as to why this is the case. We see fewer women qualified. It's generally that women are less likely to have served more than 20 years, or that women generally are incarcerated at a later point in their lives. So, for example, the Second Look Act applies to individuals between the ages of 18 and 25 who have served a minimum of 20 years. So those two criteria tend to exclude women who do not have, who were not arrested at that particular age and or have not served that portion of their sentence. So what do we need to do? One of the important things, especially when we're talking about women in prisons, it's important to note that Maryland still does not have a pre-release center that is specifically dedicated to women. So consequently, what happens? Women cannot participate in work release or receive the critical reentry support before they return to the community and their families. This is crucial because we know that reentry to be successful should actually begin when you enter the institution. Reentry does not begin when you are released. So the lack of these critical services directly impacts not only the women's chance for success, but also the family unit. As you recall, a great percentage of women who are incarcerated have children under the age of 18. And family reunification is extremely important, especially for women and children, to avoid recidivism, as well as the children down the line becoming in contact with either social services or the Department of Juvenile Services. So when we talk about this, we must work to do what? There's several things that we must work to do. We must work to prevent the forced infant separation. It's important to keep families together. We must establish women-specific reentry programs. We also must continue to elevate women's voices in all aspects of the criminal, legal, and juvenile legal systems. When we speak about second look, we must not only speak about the impact upon men, but we also must talk about how it impacts women. When we speak about reentry, we must emphasize the need for the services early and often so that women can be successful in the community. These discussions and the work must be done by all of us in the community if we are truly to promote public safety. So I asked you to join us. This was just the beginning of the conversation. I ask you to join us to dive deeper into the conversation. Next Tuesday, September the 30th, we will be in person in Rockville, Maryland, at the council office building at 6 p.m. to further discuss Steel and Stories, the impact of women and girls in the criminal legal system. If you can't join us on the 30th, I hope to see you on October the 21st. October is Youth Justice Month, so we will be in the Baltimore County at the Catonsville Library discussing issues that are important to our children. And in November, we will be again speaking on issues about community, but in this particular meeting, we're going to be talking about the Office of the Public Defender and the additional resources and how community can also support us in the continued work that we do each and every day. So if you're interested in anything that is coming up, if you want to stay connected, and I encourage you to do so, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, as well as LinkedIn. Also, additional resources and information can be found on our website. All the media addresses are located right here. And there's more. If you want to reach out to us individually, our contact information is located here. Elizabeth Hilliard is our Director of Government Relations. Hannibal Kemmer, our Chief of Staff. We are open to your ideas, your questions, And most importantly, we are partners with the community, and we thank you and look forward to your continued support and working together with you to promote and uplift all of us. Thanks, everybody. We will stop recording at